And welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and today we're going to continue our talk on testing our plans. Last week we talked about how we get our buy-in together, we show the value to our senior management and our employees and fellow colleagues and our vendors, etc. So this week I thought, well, let's focus on what kind of test we have at our disposal. What kind of test can we do, and what the details about them, and then we'll move on to how we capture what we're going to do. I also have an audit designation, so I tend to kind of look at things from an audit perspective. If we're saying we're going to do something, did we do what we said we were going to do? And our executive summary part, or our findings, we capture, this is what we did. So, audit tends to look at things like that. So I'm going to go through some of that with you. Again, this is captured in, a lot of this is captured in my book, Testing Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity Plans, and a lot of that information is there for you. So feel free to pick up a copy at Amazon. There are templates as well that you can use on stone-road.com that we sell there for you to as well, and then you can reuse them over and over again. It makes things very easy. So we're going to talk about that today. And again, I just want to stress, if anyone does have any topics they want to talk about, or if they want to be a guest on the show to talk about something that's related to the business continuity, emergency response, disaster planning, crisis communications field, lessons learned, or new ways of thinking, or any aspect of any of those groups, something that prepares people for the future, please feel free to send me an email, alex@stone-road.com, and we'll look into trying to put some sort of an agenda together and what you want to talk about, and we'll see about getting you on the show. I'm always open to new ideas and new thoughts, so please feel free to do that. I welcome your input. So let's move on to what kinds of tests do we have. It's very easy to say we're just going to test our plans, but it's not that easy all the time. There's so much to do. You can't, if it takes years and years and years to build up an organization, with multiple locations and possibly hundreds of employees and different processes and all the partners and vendors and client relationships and service level agreements and all the various technologies involved with doing that, you can't just say we're going to test and be up and running in no time at all. If it takes that long to build a company, to rebuild it after a disaster, it's not going to just happen in a day. In a perfect world it would, but since disasters are always different, no matter where you go and no matter what the situation is, they're going to impact you differently. No two disasters are the same. So when you start your plan, you're building your plans or your program, a lot of times people don't start with the ultimate of test everything all at once. You start off small and you progress through. And a lot of times the first one to start is simply a dry run. You may not have anything documented, or, it's kind of the back of a napkin type plan where you start discussing with the appropriate people at the table, what do we do? If something happens, and you have a major thing, we lose our building, let's say, we can't come into the office. What do we do? And you talk it out, and you capture, well, this is what we expect from this group. This is what this group would do, and we're thinking this would happen, and you start mapping that out, because that starts building your actual plans, and you may have assumptions, and don't forget to ever capture assumptions. I said it last week and I'll say it again. The only thing that'll be proven correct in a disaster is that all your assumptions are wrong. So capture those, and then as you move through your process of testing and validating and updating and maintaining your programs, you start looking at those assumptions and saying, no, this isn't true, or yes, this is true, and they start actually becoming, part of the overall restoration and recovery process. So a dry run, make sure you've got the right people at the table. You sit around, you talk what's going to happen, and you make sure you have someone who's documenting, doing the minutes, and the action items, and capturing assumptions or decisions that need to be made. Capture all of that. I don't always recommend that it has to be the facilitator doing that, because sometimes that's a person who's trying to tell other people, hey, let that person talk. They're trying to manage the meeting and manage the time and everything about it. It's break time, so let's go and see where we are. And, so have someone there who can actually capture and just focus on capturing that kind of stuff. Then there's the tabletop walkthrough. This is kind of like a dry run, but the walkthrough is more focused on something that has now been developed. You have let's say a skeleton plan or a draft plan, and now you're actually going to go through it based on specific simulations, whether it be a flood or tornado or wherever you are. If you're in the Midwest of the United States, you're more prone to tornadoes than you would be, tsunamis. So you would look at, situations that are relevant to wherever you are, and you would try and go through, okay, we had a hurricane, and it's on a Wednesday, on a busy processing day. Let's go through our plans. What does it say we would do? And you start working out and identifying the gaps and refining some details, and you start adding more detail to it. That skeleton plan now starts to fill out. And again, of course, you also identify, issues and risks that come out. You're building an entire program, for an entire company. So you need someone, again, to capture all that information for you, because that's your plan to move forward, right? That's how you're going to make your plans and your programs stronger. So a walkthrough, takes care of all that. But there are some things to think about when you have the walkthrough tabletop meeting, because a lot of times, and I've seen it, people will talk over each other. Don't let that happen. Everyone's point of view is valid. Everyone's got a valid point of view. A business continuity plan is not just for a director of sales or the VP of IT or client services. It's for everyone. So everyone's point of view, is valuable. They're all stakeholders, and managing that is stakeholder management, which you may remember from a previous show where we talked with Sue Ross Baker about program and project management, and stakeholder management and expectations is a key piece. So you want to make sure that that's taken care of with all these people sitting at the table. Let everyone speak, okay? And keep everyone calm. Sometimes talking about disasters, it can bring out, emotions, especially right now, as I'm recording this. I know that there are floods going on in Houston, and it's terrible to see the devastation and the impact that it's having on people, and it can bring out emotions. So when you're talking, with people at a tabletop, going through a plan where it's possible the scenario you've chosen has potential casualties, you're talking about people's friends and maybe even themselves, and their work colleagues. So try keep calm. There's no point in everyone yelling over each other and trying to figure things out. Again, I have already mentioned it. Have someone who takes notes, and the action items, the issues, the risks, the gaps, anything that needs to be done. Don't forget that. And if you do have a documented plan, make sure everyone's got a copy. If you're doing the tabletop walkthrough, that's the plan you're testing, or you're walking through. I shouldn't say testing, but you're walking through that. So make sure everyone's got a plan, so that way they can stick to the situation and the scenario you've chosen. If the situation is about flooding, why are we talking about earthquakes, on the other side of the planet? You may get there at some point, at a future exercise, a future test, but right now, stick with the situation, that you've got. The scenario you've chosen is X, so stick with X. And of course, and I mentioned assumptions, stick with assumptions as well. Keep reviewing those as you go through the walkthrough. When you did your dry run, you may have identified 10 different assumptions. Well, now that you're going through a dry run, have you addressed those 10 assumptions? Are they proven correct? Is there an issue with them? Are they still valid? and you want to make sure, because if you don't need them anymore, we assume sales would do XYZ. You get to your walkthrough and you find out sales does not do XYZ. Well, then you got to account for that. Our next one is the component level test. So on a component level test, you are doing exactly that. You're just testing one component. When we talk about component level testing, a lot of times it tends to refer to different technology components. So things like the email server, so to speak. That's the one piece we're going to test. Can we disconnect it from our production environment, recreate it, and how long does it take us to do? After you do your business impact analysis, which will be a future show topic, we're supposed to have email up in 3 hours. Well, let's test that component. Can we bring that piece up in 3 hours? If not, what's the problem? Do we not have the equipment? Do we not have the resources? Is it certain configurations that are in place that don't allow us to do that? So you want to go through all of that, right? And make sure that in a real situation, when email goes down, you do have it up in 3 hours. But you're only going to be able to do that by rehearsing and testing that component. And as you move forward, that component starts falling into larger and larger tests. 3 hours we're to have email up, and we're supposed to have, the ABC server up. Now, can you do that? Can you do those components? And when that starts happening, you start moving into the functional testing, where you take a line of business, so to speak, a whole process from end to end, and every system, every business unit, every IT unit that has something to do with that process is involved. From data entry to creating reports at the end, to the technology that sends files to the multiple locations where they need to go. You test that whole stream. That's this marketing application process that we have is the most important system we've got in the company. So you want to make sure, can we bring that up when we need to? What pieces are involved with that? What do we need to do? So, and functional sometimes can also mean other pieces of the business continuity management program. The whole crisis management function. I've seen, like I said, a lot of people tend to think it's technology recovery, but I've also been at clients where they say, well, when we talk about functional testing, we're also not just talking about the business unit processes and bringing them up, or IT functions that need to come up, but some of our disaster recovery stuff as well. So that's a thought that you might want to keep, which is, as a good example, would be your evacuation procedures, that whole function. How does that work? Do we have everything in place? And I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago again. And from the time the alarms go off, do the fire wardens or floor wardens know what to do? Do the employees know what to do? Do they know where to go? What do they do when they get there? Who do they talk to? Who do the floor wardens talk to when they get outside? Who talks to the first responders? What information do they have to have for the first responders? So, I know some people talk about that as the entire function. So, when you're talking like that, think about functional testing. Think of the end-to-end, what starts and how it ends, that whole process. That's functional testing. Then we move on to simulations, where we actually simulate a specific situation. And I'm not sure if it's pleasure or not, but I've had the experiences of going through a few of these, actually more than a few, quite a few, where we simulate we've lost a facility, we've lost a main component, and what do we do? And everything involved with that, which means activating, the processes for your crisis management team, how they communicate at first notification of a situation, how they activate the various teams. So the technology teams goes off and recreates, rebuilds or restores, the necessary equipment and the data needed, to having once they finish that, bringing in users from the business side, validate that everything works. And if you have third-party vendors, it includes them as well. identified a problem. We can't deal with it here. We have to put our vendor on notice. We're still dealing with it on our side, but we can't get it resolved now. So now the notification to the vendor, you're active. You need to make your site available because we're sending people over there. And then they do what they need to do. So you simulate that full end-to-end process that you've documented, which would have started off by doing components and dry walkthroughs and tabletops and functional. Now you're kind of bringing all of those together to the next step, and making sure that it works. And I've been through those. And at one company I worked for, we had, and I think I mentioned this last week, 3 different countries, 5 locations, and 170 people. That was a lot to coordinate and a lot to plan. And I'm going to get to the planning part afterwards, a little later. But as you start doing these simulations, there's a greater level of planning involved, quite a bit of planning involved, because it's the first time you're doing it. And you, like I said, last week, you don't want to impact your production environments. If you want to make sure that your clients and your customers and, the employees that are working on things aren't impacted by these tests. So simulations can take a lot of planning to make sure that production environments are still covered. If there's an issue there, they can still be dealt with. Not everyone is taken away and working on the test. So simulations, when you first start them, can take up a lot of planning. Sometimes a couple of months to document everything. And what I'm going to touch base on in the next 2 segments is actually how you identify that, how you capture that from an audit perspective, and what I call like a scope charter artifact or document that outlines, the context and everything involved with the test. And then our final test is one that not usually a lot of people do, and that's the unannounced, where you just if it's the vice president of IT or, client services or finance, or somebody just says, snap of a finger, we're now in disaster mode, go to it. Those can be really tricky because that causes a lot of panic, and it will ultimately impact, your daily operations, your clients, your customers that are calling in when all of a sudden you're in disaster mode. And sometimes that does include putting messages up on your internet sites and your phone messages saying that we're experiencing a disaster right now. Call us back in 2 hours or the next day or whatever the circumstances may call for. But that can cause a lot of problems because some people they don't see the smoke, so they don't think it's a real disaster. So people tend to spend the first hour or 2 wandering around. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's happening? What do we do? Rather than pull out the plan. This is what we need to do. So those can be really tricky to manage. But if you do it, more power to you, because it means if you're able to do that and pull that off, then you've done all these other testing. Your training is really up to par. The awareness is really there. So if you can do that, that's great, and it gives a real true picture of where you are. In your program, are you really as far as you think you are? Or is it really just been, candy coating? So on that, those are the different kinds of tests that we have. On our next segment, we'll come back and we'll talk about, getting our scope together and some of the planning activities around some of these big tests. Okay? So we'll be right back with preparing for the unexpected, and we'll talk to you in a few moments. And welcome back. We're talking about tests this week, and part 2 of our 3-part series. And this segment, we're going to talk about how we plan for our tests, and also from an audit perspective, so that we can prove that we are doing what we are saying we're going to do. As a person who's done a lot of auditing, especially of plans and programs, and worked in program or project management, I tend to try and make audit my best friend. If they have questions, deal with them. I know a lot of people tend to see audit as an enemy, but all they're doing is making sure that we are doing what we say we are doing, and can prove it. So It's almost like a policeman, right? So they can be very helpful, and one of the ways to do that, especially with these large tests, the simulations, like I mentioned in the last segment, when you're first starting out, you've got to do a lot of planning. It's best to capture some of this planning, so that everyone has the same expectation. And what I tend to do is I create a document I call either a scope charter or the test charter, the test scope document. You can name it whatever you want, and it's full of the parameters that make up this test. So what kind of sections are in there? Well, obviously, like all documents, you've got your usual, revision histories and your overview, what it is you're doing. We're testing our business continuity management program, our disaster program, to meet audit requirements, or if you're going for to try and meet standard obligations like ISO or something else. We're doing this so that we can get our certification in that standard. So that usually makes up the first couple of pages, with the purpose. What's the purpose of this document? Who's it for? The audience, and these documents, by the way, I know I'm saying documents, but it's actually just one document. So I don't want anyone to panic out there thinking that there's a whole bunch of things they need to fill out. It's just one. The audience, it's not general audience, for everyone in the company. It's usually just the major stakeholders in the business continuity program. So your sponsor, your vice presidents, your project management team, which is usually the BCM or BCP coordinator, the guy who's in charge of putting this test on, and it's that you kind of limit your audience. You don't just give it to every single person in the company. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done, right? So the next section, you put the test in context. So you identify the sponsor. Now, I do want to talk about the sponsor because the sponsor is very important, not just in testing, but in the overall program. If you don't have a sponsor, you're going to be fighting uphill battles all the way. People are going to want to change things on you, and I've been through it with testing. We had a sponsor, but one unit wanted us to continually change some of the things that we were doing. And one of them was, users always have different shortcuts on their desktops, which we all do, on our home computers and work computers. And they said, for the test, this is all our testers, and these are all their shortcuts, so make sure they're on their desktops. Well, I instantly asked, our sponsor, do we do that on a normal basis, on a daily basis? And they said no. So I said, well, then we're not going to do this in the test. We're planning everything. We're trying to test the plan. So if we don't do that on a normal basis, why are we going to do that for the test? I documented a change request, which I'll get to in this document as well, and it was declined. And I went back to that unit and said, no. The sponsor said, no, you don't do that on a daily basis. It's not part of normal operations, so it's not going to be part of our test. But a sponsor is really important because they provide us financial support. They help determine the scope of the test. We're going to do crisis management teams and all our technology recovery with business validation at the end, as an example. They designate the test coordinator, which a lot of times ends up being, the BCP coordinator or whatever the role is called. That's the person who's kind of in charge of the test, and the project manager. You can call that person. They determine the goals and the objectives of the test. They provide approval on any changes, like the one I just mentioned now. We had, there were other instances where if we were going to test something, we needed a specific system, but we didn't identify that system in our scope. So we had to add a change request to say, yes, this is now a part of this scope, because in the document, you've listed everything that's in scope, and that system wasn't there. So we had to add it, and the sponsor looks at it and says, yes, we need that, and they sign off, and that becomes a part of your scope. If it's not signed off, it's not a part of your scope. I'm sure many of you have been through projects where there's what you call scope creep. and things just tend to go out of hand, and you've got all this stuff getting done, but your scope isn't actually getting accomplished. All this other stuff is. So the sponsor provides a voice for business continuity at the executive boardroom. They help resolve conflicts, when people really want something, or teams aren't getting along because they're butting heads on how to do something, or if something should be done at all, and they provide moral support, right? We all need that. So sponsors are pretty important, and this project charter, this test charter, helps identify who that person is. That's the person who's paying for all of it, so you want to make sure they're happy, of course, right? So identify that. Because they identify the project manager, the charter should also identify who's their representative in this whole test. And a lot of times it was me, and my colleague at the time, Mr. David Budd. He was my colleague, or what was the other gentleman's name? Gino Giampaolo, I think his name was, if I'm remembering it right. It was either one of the three of us that were, one or all of us actually, that were always identified there, and we took all kinds of control of what needed to get done, and massaged different things that needed to be addressed, and issue management, and assigned the actions and things like that. So you want to make sure that all your stakeholders know who is the focal point for the test, who's coordinating it. They're also going to want to know when the test is. You've got to clearly define. You can't just say it's the end of September somewhere. What date, what time in September, when does it start? If you've got a third-party vendor, a lot of times you have to book your test, a year and a half, or maybe even 2 years in advance. I know we had to book a test 2 years in advance once, because the time frame we wanted had already been booked by another client of the vendor. So you want to know and identify when this test is going to be, when it starts, 8 a.m. on the morning of a Saturday, and it ends 8 a.m., on the morning on the Monday, a full 48 hours. And that also helps other teams that will be a part plan their resources, know that who needs to be on site at the test, or who's dialing in from home into the to do validation exercises, and activities, so that it allows people to know what framework of what they're working in, and if you're doing a test, you also want to know the declaration time, because a lot of times, if you're doing something major, you may be starting the test on Friday morning or Saturday morning at 8 a.m., but you're declaring at, Thursday, 8 p.m. So in your plan, you may have by the 12-hour mark, we will be at such and such point. So you put in your declaration time. Our test, we're declaring disaster at 8 p.m. on Thursday, but the test is starting on Friday at 8 a.m. So that also allows people to know that when they bring their systems up, and they validate everything should be good, hopefully, nearest to 8 p.m. Thursday when that disaster happened as possible. So it gives that time frame. And you also want the goals and objectives, some primary goals and, secondary goals. Primary ones you really want to make sure are addressed. If you've got a recovery time of 24 hours to have such and such up and running, like I mentioned before, that's your goal. We need to be there at this point, this milestone, by such and such a time. So that's your goal and objective, and you want to confirm or validate anything. Goals and objectives, you want them to be SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, timely. You want to make sure that they are, you can actually measure what you're doing, right? This is what we want to do, this is what we did, and this is how we measure against that. So your goals and objectives, you'll get that from your sponsors as well, and you'll probably get input from other teams that are involved as well, because they may have some secondary goals, within their own, business continuity plan or crisis management plan. If they're involved with the test, they may say, well, if we're a part of this test, we want to have this. We want to validate this piece as well. So you put that in, and with those goals and objectives, you also want to put a measurement. If, like I said, if you have a recovery objective of 24 hours to have everything up and running, then you're going to measure everything against that, right? If it doesn't get up and running until 36 hours, well, you didn't meet your objective. If it's up in 20 hours, hey, you exceeded it. That's fantastic. You came in under. You got it up sooner, and hopefully that happens through practice. And people, doing that over and over again and refining the documentation. You also want to list what's not in scope. Like I mentioned, scope creep. If it's not captured in the scope area, you're not working on it. And if you are, it's a change request, to the test. But list, the basic stuff that's not in scope, so everyone understands. So you've got your page that says, this is what we are testing, this is what's in scope, our systems, our processes, our teams, however you want to capture that, but also say, but that means we're not doing this. We're not testing these components. So that everyone understands that. List your stakeholders, all the key groups, like I said, if you're having marketing, sales, client services, and finance involved with your test, make sure you've got one or two key individuals representing those areas that are kept in the loop of what's going on, because they're going to help assign people from their teams to your test. They're going to help identify, these are going to be my representatives. They're going to help put our teams together, to come on site and do the testing. They're going to help validate. They're going to give you information when they're doing what they need to do. Their progress. They're identifying issues, etc. So keep all your stakeholders identified. From your key sponsors to your business units to your technology teams. Make sure you've got them all identified. Then everyone knows who they need to go to as a point of contact. They may assign someone else, but at least we know that's the person who's responsible to make sure the activities within finance, as an example, are done. Then you want to identify in the same charter the team's roles and responsibilities. Now, this can be tricky sometimes because you're mixing a little bit of planning activities, which normally wouldn't happen in a disaster, with some of the responsibilities that need to occur in a real situation. So be very careful when you're writing some of these out, because these roles and responsibilities are associated with everyone on the team. And I'm going to give you some examples in a few minutes, because the sponsor has roles, the project managers, the BCP coordinator or the test facilitator has responsibilities as well. And then all the project team, all those representatives, they have responsibilities as well. So I'm going to go through that in a couple of minutes, because we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back with our talk about planning our tests. This is our last segment, and we're talking about planning for our tests, what we need to capture and document, so that when we get to our test, we've got everything lined up, all the right activities done. And as I said at the beginning when I started this is when you really start. You're the first time you go through this. When you start doing these tests more and more, the roles and responsibilities, the scopes, the teams involved all start to become known. And you start refining your plans as you go through these tests. You start updating them, identifying issues and things that need to be addressed. So the planning time frame gets shorter and shorter and shorter. At least it should. If it's not, well, then maybe you're not actually moving in the right direction. You're doing, instead of trying to reduce the planning effort and increase the knowledge, you're increasing the knowledge of planning, but the knowledge of what the actual test is and what needs to be done there is not increasing. So we left off at teams' role and responsibilities. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of what the roles and responsibilities of some of the participants needs to be. The sponsor, I think I went through some of those, but they approve, decline, change requests, which sometimes can include money as well. And they provide guidance to the project manager or the test facilitator when things pop up. So they take that role. The test facilitator or the project manager of the test, they're the single party, the single point of contact for everybody. And anything that needs to happen with the test, that's the person they come to. If they have an issue that needs to be dealt with, bring it to the project manager, and the project manager can get the right people involved for you, and you can go meet them and hopefully resolve your issue. They're the single point of contact. If you have a DR vendor, that's the person that they need to talk to, so that the vendor and yourself, are on the same wavelength and all your expectations are being met. They're managing the risk and mitigation logs and the issue logs. They're making decisions based on the guidance provided by the sponsor. And let's be honest, sometimes not everyone gets their way. So when you communicate a decision, document it. Capture it so that that this is what we decided on this point, and this is the reasoning why, and this is the date that it was decided, so that when the test comes along, people aren't, well, we didn't know that, and so we went and did this anyway, because then they can kind of skew your results. We did it successfully, well, that's fine, but it wasn't in scope, so it doesn't have to add any value to us. So those are some roles of the project manager. And the team members, well, they're the first point of contact for their own little teams. If the stakeholder for finance identifies Jill as the point of contact, anything to do with finance, the project manager and all other teams go to Jill. She will take her teams and talk with them and work through their activities and coordinate what needs to be done there, and then anything that needs to be brought back to the project manager or the test coordinator, that's what she will do. She has the authority to make decisions within her own team, for finance, and they own and investigate and resolve their own issues. As a lot of times, people have a problem or an issue and they expect everyone else to fix it. But sometimes, a lot of times, actually, the answer is within your own group. So those are just some very high-level roles and responsibilities you want to capture. You want to put, I mentioned this earlier as a milestone, you want to put some key milestones so that people know where they are. And some of those milestones may be, this is the declaration date of the test. At 12 hours, we expect to be at XYZ point. That's another milestone. At 24 hours, we expect to be at this milestone. Or you could just say, our milestone is Outlook to be up and running in 3 hours. That's what you're shooting for. Business, if they're coming in and generating reports, and they have 3 hours to generate the entire reports that they normally do on a daily operation, well, then you capture that as a milestone, with the time frame in there and say, this is where we are. And then where your deficiencies are. When you finish your test, it's, we got it done within that time frame, which is fantastic. However, we've got some issues with our report generation because it actually took 6 hours. And then the activities that came after that were shortened. So, you want to capture some milestones so people know where they're going and how they're progressing to those milestones. And of course, and I've mentioned it before with the test types, when it comes to the actual tests, these simulation tests, these big tests, make sure you capture assumptions. If you're assuming, that certain activities will be kicked off by certain people, as an example, nobody starts an activity until the disaster notification application is activated and everyone receives a specific email that says, now you can start. If that's the assumption, then fine, because otherwise people might start a day or two early. And I've seen it. I've seen people start early, and just to make things look good, but in the end, it didn't validate that our initiation kickoff piece actually worked. So it didn't help in the end. So, capture your assumptions, and make sure that you address those and that everyone is aware of them. And identify your constraints. You want to document anything that is a constraint for you. one constraint may be production environment. Any testing that you do cannot touch production. We cannot make sure that anything we're doing does not touch the production environment. And it could also be that if there's an issue in the production environment while you're testing, the people who are testing may be the ones who need to stop their testing and go address the issues that are occurring in the production environment. So the production environment could be a constraint for you, depending on how you're set up, the time frames you're testing, what kind of testing and what you're testing. But make sure you document your constraints. It could also be resources too. As I just used the example, the people that are testing could also be the same people who need to support, client issues, or other employee issues, desktop problems and things like that, that could be drawn away from the test. So capture that. You don't, if you only have 20 people in IT and they're doing tests and production, well, they're going to be spread a little bit thin. And you can't expect people to work 24, 48 hours. Even though I've seen people try to do that, and even I tried to do that once, and I was sleeping in a chair, and I think there's a picture somewhere of me doing that, after about 30 hours where just not moving anymore. So, also another constraint, if you do have a vendor, and not just so much a vendor even, it could be some sort of a contractual constraint as well. You only have your alternate site, whether it be with a third party or your own location at another city or another building, within the same city. We can only use that for 48 hours. It doesn't matter what we do, how we're doing, if we're resolving issues, we still need to be done by such and such a time. And no matter where we are, as of such and such a time, we have to stop. Because the building, the facility has to be handed over to new people who are testing, or back over to the daily operations team to come in and do their production activities. So make sure you capture your constraints. What might hold you back? Things that could hamper your progress. And I alluded to this already. Change management. Make sure you outline the change management process. If someone wants to add something to the scope, or even if something has to come out of scope, you want to document it. What's the reason for it? Why are we adding this? What's the benefit to adding this? What will it do for us? What plan does that impact? What team does it impact? Does it increase, our time frames? Does it incorporate or add additional risk to our test and what we're doing? So you want to make sure you capture your change management process and document it, and have a change management template. And I have a basic one on my website, alexfolek.com. You can get to it. And it allows you to just quickly document. And again, you take that to the sponsor. And if the sponsor agrees, he signs off on it, and you can go back to the team, whether it be finance, client services, whoever, and say, yeah, we're going to do that. Or if there's something we can't do because for whatever reason, if we test this, we have to shut down, this piece of production, or it could impact. The risk is too great. No, we're going to take that out of scope, and we're not going to test that right now. We'll do that at another time. You want to capture that again in your change management process, because it's in your scope. It says you will have done this. So when you get to your findings, which we'll talk about next time, it's going to say you tested XYZ, but really you didn't, because you would have impacted production if you did. But your document says you did. So now it looks as though you kind of didn't do something and you're fudging your results, and you don't want to do that. You want to be clear and transparent, and everyone understands. So your change management process has to be clear, transparent to everybody. Everything comes to the test coordinator, and they go to the sponsor and say, is this valid or not? And sometimes the test coordinator is going to know in advance. Like the example I said about the shortcuts people put on their desktops. You don't do that in normal operations. Technology doesn't do that. They don't monitor it. And I can't imagine anyone ever doing that. At least maybe it does, and maybe you could send me an email and let me know how you do that. But if a company has 1,000 employees and shortcuts are changing on people's desktops every day because of something they like or see or need, I can't see how you would be able to do that with a test, and pull all that together. That'd be very difficult for people, I'm sure. So you also want to put in the next section, the risk management and mitigation. You want to know, identify our risk if we do this. Are we avoid? What could be the impact? I tend to like the if-then statements. If this happens, then this could impact us, and then follow it up with a qualifier. So what? What does that mean to our test? Oh, nothing. It's just awareness. Okay, well then that's fine. But it could be if we don't have this in place by 3 hours, then Outlook's not going to be up and running, and we won't be able to test the follow-up processes afterwards. Well, that's different. Okay, how are we going to do that? Let's check our plan. We go through that. We find our mitigations to address the risks. So make sure you have a risk mitigation section. And then if you're during your test, you want to have periodic conference calls with key players and the key stakeholders, because they're going to want to know how things are going. You're not just walking into a testing location and doing your own thing and never communicating to them. So you're either going to want to leave a voicemail somewhere that they can all access and listen to what the status is, or a conference bridge, which you'll want to keep in this document to say, call this line at these time frames, every 3 hours. We're going to have a quick conference call for 10 minutes to give a status to everybody. Then make sure that's in here, because then everyone's got that information. Issue management as well. This is issue management not just during planning, but also issue management, how you're going to do that during the test. If there's an issue comes up, are they going to run to the test facilitator before they do anything? Or do they have the authority to address it, right then and there? But then after that's been taken care of, come back to the test facilitator to let them know this was our issue and this is what we did about it, and then document it, because you may need that at future tests, right? And the last piece you want to make sure you put in there is terminology, because everyone's got a different answer for what is a disaster, what is business continuity, what is a recovery time objective. Put in some of the basic terminology so you're all speaking the same language. Okay? And then once you've got all that and you've reviewed it with everybody, and especially the sponsor, get sign off. And then that's the Bible of truth. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And you can use that when anybody comes to you regarding suggestions to changes or to do something different. It's like, that's not in our charter, our test charter. So if you want to do that, put a change request together and justify it why. And then everyone's working in the same playpen, right? So I suggest using that. I've used it many times. It works very well, and I already know for a fact, because I've been audited a few times on tests, audit loves it. So I suggest everyone do something like that. So that's our show this week. I hope it's given some insight of planning on these tests, and some ideas on how you can help coordinate and make your tests come better. Next week, I hope that you join us for our third part, and we're going to talk about the findings. When we actually do the test and we capture our findings, what do we do afterwards? Again, if you do have any questions or even just comments, or topic ideas, please send me an email, alex@stone-road.com. You can find me on Stone Road Inc. on Facebook, Twitter at Prep4DR, Stone Road's blog on WordPress, or just you can find me through alexfullick.com even. So feel free to send some information. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and input. This is your show as well, so I look forward to it. Take care and stay prepared, everyone. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.